Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 36th episode of Stories of Service, ordinary people who do extraordinary work. And I am the host of Stories of Service, Teresa Carpenter. And today, as we always do, I have another amazing guest. And this time, it's not just an amazing guest, it is a fellow podcaster. Hello, Amanda.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, I am so excited to have you. You were one of my inspirations to start my own podcast. So I'm going to read you guys a little bit about Amanda, and then we're going to get right into some questions. As I said, she's a podcaster, a veteran, and a military spouse. She served in the Air Force for 6 years as a civil engineer, including a deployment to Afghanistan. She met her husband while attending college, and they served on active duty together until their first son was born. It was then that she traded in her combat boots for a diaper bag to stay home. Amanda is now a mom of 2 boys and continues to follow her husband's military career. She's lived in New Mexico, Ohio, California, and currently resides in Northern Virginia. She published her first book in 2019 titled Women in the Military, sharing the stories of 28 military women. In 2019, she also launched her podcast, also titled Women in the Military, and it now has over 170 episodes. In September, her newest book, A Girl's Guide to Military Service, will be released. The goal of this book is to help girls who are considering the military and helping to answer questions that they may have. And she's also been published on multiple military sites and magazines. Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you. So first off, I always love, and I know you've been asked this a million times, as I think all of us people in the military, you know what I'm going to ask, is why did you join the military?
I should know the answer. Actually, I kind of always answer it a little bit differently because I don't know. I learned more about myself and I realized why the 18, 19-year-old Amanda started looking into the military. And for a long time, I used to say September 11th because that happened my senior year. But my ex-boyfriend broke up with me also right after he went to college. And I was thinking we were going to get married and I had like no real plans for my life. And then like everything imploded and I was single and I didn't know what I was going to do. And I was like, well, the military, that seems like a great idea. And so I was friends with a lot of people who were joining the military. And so that was probably what drew me in, was that all these people I knew were either enlisting or doing ROTC, or one was in the National Guard and he was getting recalled. And I was like, oh, all these people are in the military. Maybe I should check it out too. And that was what started me on the journey towards military service.
Wow. So what did people tell you when they were telling you about the military? What did they say about it? And how is what they said about the military differ than what kind of your first initial experiences were?
I think we all were just so excited about what the military had to offer. And I was in college and going to school in a small town in California, and I kind of felt like I was going to be stuck there for my whole life. And when people were talking about the military, they were talking about going different places. And so I was like, oh, I want to get out of Fresno and go and see the world. And that was what I really wanted to do. I wanted to get out and do something different.
Did you feel like what they told you was the same as what you experienced initially?
Yeah, I think so. And I did ROTC, so the Reserve Officer Training Corps. So I did that for 4 years before I went active duty. And I feel like ROTC gave me a good foundation. It's not what it's actually like to be on active duty. So I was still a little bit surprised at like the day-to-day job. Like we didn't march anywhere on active duty and we marched everywhere in ROTC. And it was more like a classroom setting instead of the real world. And so I think doing ROTC for 4 years kind of like slowly led me into understanding the military, and I wasn't that surprised. It was different, but it wasn't like unexpected.
Right. And so you get into the military, and how did you decide what you were going to do?
So at the ROTC open house, I met an electrical engineer, and he was like, oh, you like math? Do you like math theory? And I was like, no. And he was like, well, if you want to do like hands-on math, I love math, and do like all these equations and calculations, you should look into engineering. And then he's like, electrical's really hard, civil is probably your best choice. And I dumbly, with like no more research than that, was like, okay, let's do it. And so,
Wow,
and
you
then
just so good.
yeah, I like kind of looking back, I'm like, that was kind of like not a good idea. I should have asked more questions and like maybe I should have looked into electrical or mechanical or the other engineering fields that were often offered. But he was older, he was about to commission, and he was telling me about all the cool things that the Air Force civil engineers do, and I was hooked and sold. And so I just switched my major and started engineering the next year.
Wow. Wow. Was that, but you said you were good at math growing up, or you were, so that wasn't a huge jump for you to try to learn all that, was it?
No, because I was already like the basic math courses that you have to take to get a math degree. Like I was planning on getting my degree in mathematics. It's like calculus and physics and that sort of thing. You need that for engineering as well. So I just needed less like liberal arts things of like English and history. There's still some basics, so it wasn't really that big of a jump to switch from mathematics to engineering.
Okay. So you go to school for engineering and then you end up at your first duty station. What was your first duty station?
Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico,
Okay.
Alamo Gordo. It
And
makes
how was
my
that?
it makes my tiny town of Fresno, which isn't really tiny, it's like a 500,000 people. Now it was smaller when I was growing up, but it only had like 30,000 people, and a Walmart, Chili's, and Applebee's were like that was the place to hang out, and it's not much
Wow.
bigger today. And yeah, so it was a big shock to the system, but it was also really great because all the lieutenants, like there wasn't anything to do except hang out with the other lieutenants. So I made a lot of
Mhm.
really good friends in my husband's squadron and then in my squadron. And so it was a really fun place to be as second lieutenants.
So you mentioned your husband. So were you already married and with your husband at this point?
Yeah, we got married my last year of school so that we could get stationed together, and the Air Force was able to work it so that we could both be assigned at the same place. And we were married the whole time that we were on active duty.
Oh, wow. So you guys were married through your deployment because I know that you deployed to Afghanistan, right?
Yep, yep.
Wow. So did you have your kids when you deployed to Afghanistan?
No, we didn't have kids. We were married for over 6 years before we had our son,
Gotcha.
which was great. I highly recommend it. Like it was great to travel the world together, to be able to both have careers and not have to worry about the challenges of having a family. And so it really worked well for us. And I mean, I had just graduated from college, so I think I was like 22 when we got married. So we were really young, not ready to have kids.
Right, right. And so you took some time to just travel, work on your careers, and then it came to this point where you said, "Okay, well, first tell me a little bit about Afghanistan. Just tell me about what that experience was like for you."
So I was in the Air Force, but I got to deploy with the Army, and I got to deploy with an Army infantry unit in 2010 before women could be in Army infantry units.
Mm.
And we were running convoys in Afghanistan. And as an engineer, my job was to inspect the projects that the Afghan contractors were working on. So we had roads, schools, bridges, government buildings, and a few other smaller projects like wells and gabion basket walls. And so we would go to the different sites and we would meet with our contractors. We would check on the status of their work, make sure that they were meeting certain requirements. And then we also at the base would facilitate the payments and meet with contractors there. And we also had 2 local national engineers who would go out and do kind of a deeper dive assessment on the sites
Mhm.
because they could stay there longer. And we had a lot of different missions to hit and a limited amount of time. So we would do like a 20-minute assessment real quick and then go to the next place where our local national engineers would go there for like the whole day and do an inspection really detailed. And they would tell us what they found and then we would write up reports about that.
If you don't mind sharing, I'm curious, what was that like in terms of like contracting work? Was there a lot of things that you saw that you could, I think I remember reading that there were things that you wish you could have fixed that you couldn't. And tell me a little bit about what that experience was like for you.
Yeah, so we didn't have all the resources and tools that we needed to do inspections. Like we had road projects in the middle of Afghanistan, and like we didn't have any of the tools. Like they would send us core samples, which you're supposed to do like stress strain tests. And it's like you can't just like use your hands, you have to use equipment, and we didn't have any of that, and we didn't even have anywhere to send it to get the information. So it was kind of like it was written into the contract that they had to provide core samples, but they essentially were useless because there wasn't any way that we could use them. I think we used them as like to line our planner boxes that we made. But it was really like we were given like this huge responsibility, and then the military's like, here's a laptop and a pencil, good luck, you know, like. And so it was really challenging in that sense that we didn't have like the tools that we needed to do these construction projects. And we were a team of, we had 2 engineers, a senior NCO, and then we had a corps of engineers. So we had 4 people for all these projects, and it was just a lot of work, and it was in a war zone on top of that.
Yeah.
So it was really complicated. And like the local national engineers were great, and they did a lot of stuff, and they were really helpful, but even they didn't have like all the tools and equipment. It's not like we could be like, here's the core sample, go take it to your lab. They didn't have that either. They just had their expertise to rely on.
It sounds like it was like people who were trying to do the right thing, but just weren't given the right tools to do the right thing. And that can be very frustrating because I think people want to do a good job, but a lot of times either they're not empowered to do the job properly, or they're not, like you said, given the resources to do the job properly. And I think that we sort of saw that play out and when you look at what happened with Afghanistan. I think that obviously the problem there was much deeper than what we're talking about, but your experience, I think, is a little bit of a microcosm of sort of the bigger issues that you, exactly as Al said, you know, typical not enough resources, but you still have to get the job done. And I agree. And just a couple people are thanking us for the podcast. Thanks, Hiram. I've joined a couple of his shows before, and they were really great. And then John Snap as well. So thank you. And then a LinkedIn user says, happy to be here. Sometimes if the people aren't friends with me on LinkedIn, I can't see who they are. So thank you, LinkedIn user. So I'm curious, what do you think, looking back on that experience, what do you wish that they could have done differently? Now that you've had a chance to reflect on it, what do you think could have been different? Like if you had been able to go back and change some of the circumstances?
I wish we would have worked more directly with the Afghan people. A lot of the stuff that came from Kabul and down to us at the local level. And I mean, we were building these 2-story schoolhouses next to mud huts, and it was like, maybe we should work at their level and help them, you know, get the resources to make a mud hut schoolhouse. Like, do they need a 2-story schoolhouse that has a generator we had a generator that they filled with water, and then they were like, we need a new one, it doesn't work. And we're like, but you put water in it, and that's why it doesn't work. Like a new one's not going to help because you need gasoline. And it was like we were trying to I felt like the military was trying to push American values onto the Afghan people, especially in these small remote villages where they weren't aware of the technology or understood the technology, and they didn't need it really per se. They needed just mud huts and resources for like books for classrooms and computers, and you would be surprised that you can have internet in a mud hut, because we always would hit wires with our so they were able to get like technology and electricity into these like shanties, and we were building these 2-story schoolhouses, which then once they were built, they had the problem of sustainment because they didn't know how to fill up the generator with gasoline. They didn't know how to repair the lights when they started to fall out, or if they needed new light bulbs. So it was kind of like we were trying to push them into the future, but we weren't giving them the tools to get from point A to point B.
That's fascinating. Yeah, it really goes back to the idea, and it's like this on a micro level too, not just on a macro level like Afghanistan. You have to meet people where they're at, or meet a situation where it's at, and then just gradually baby step it along. Even as a leader, you don't task everybody evenly. You task each person with what you think they can handle based on their capability levels, and you set people and situations up for success that way. And it sounds like you guys just weren't given those tools to succeed in the way that you could have, looking back on it. And so, but it sounds like you made the best out of a less than ideal situation. And I'm glad that you had that experience so that you can reflect on it. So after Afghanistan, did you have another duty station after that? Or is that when you got out, around the time you got out?
No, I did. My husband, he got into school at Athens in Ohio, and I was able to PCS with him. My commander, Colonel Knudsen, was amazing, and he was able to work a joint spouse assignment. And so I got home from Afghanistan, and my husband had left like a suitcase full of stuff at my house, and he was already in Ohio, and my friend let me stay with her for a few weeks. So I in process, out process, and then moved to Ohio to be with him. Yeah, it's a little complicated.
Yeah. I mean, such is the life of being in the military. You're constantly just doing things, going from one place to another. And just, especially as a dual military, it's a great deal in some ways, like you said, but at the same time, it's a lot of Tetris on the part of the family and on the part of the detailers or the job placement people to try to figure it out. And yeah, not having the right resources is going back to that point is definitely something a lot of people can relate to. Blair Peterson says, I worked at a master jet base and we can't get the support equipment we need. We have to sub custody things all the time. And absolutely. And I think that that's like one of the frustrations people have in any job, corporate America, nonprofit work, wherever, is when you don't have all the resources to do the job, it can be very, very frustrating because people, I think, naturally want to do a good job. I do believe that. So what influenced your decision to leave and get out?
So my husband and I, as you heard, was a little bit complicated to get stationed together. And that really happened because my commander, he was dual military. So he worked behind the scenes to make it so that I could get stationed with my husband. And I felt like his career field, my career field were like oil and water. It was like really hard to get stationed together. It was really hard for our like assignment rotations to link up, and we were constantly trying to make everything happen. And the deployment to Afghanistan was also really, really hard on me as a person because it was a year, 4 months of training and 9 months of being deployed. And so when we started thinking about having kids, I thought about like the sacrifices that I would have to make so that I could make it to 20 years and retire. And maybe at some point, like 13 years down the road after going on deployments and leaving my kids behind, we would end up being stationed in 2 different places, and then I would get out anyway. So I kind of was like, I don't see how we'll both be able to make it to 20 years, and I don't know if I want to make all those sacrifices and not get the retirement. And so I decided to leave. When I got pregnant, I put in my package to get out.
Yeah. And I think you wanted to have that time. I mean, there's a lot to be said about having that time with your children. And it is, there are some people who can pull it off. And then I think there are other people who it's just not possible, or it's just a choice that people, say, okay, I've done my time and I've done enough. It's now time to get out. What was the transition like for you? Was it a hard adjustment from working to like, okay, now I'm home full time?
It was like a train wreck. It was so hard.
Oh God.
My son was 4 months old when I officially got out, but when my son was 2 months old, my husband went to training for 8 weeks. And so when my husband came back, that was like when I was officially getting out, and my son didn't sleep that whole time. And I was like out processing and figuring out childcare so that I could survive on my own for that 8 weeks. It was kind of like a sign that it was the right choice to get out of the military, because the military was like, here's how complicated your life is going to be. And so, but I had so much of my identity wrapped up into being a captain in the military, being a civil engineer, being just a service member in general. And when I left the military and I struggled with being a mom, I was like, why isn't this mom role filling me up the way that like being a captain and being that? And so I really struggled with that transition, and I miss the military a lot. And I often wondered, like, did I make the right choice?
Do you still feel that way even now?
No.
Okay.
Heck no.
Wow. So what was it that changed things around for you?
Well, my kids got older. That helped. They're a lot more fun when they're older and they can talk and wipe their own
Mhm.
bottoms and all those things. I think that's part of it, and then also, like, the memories that I got to make, with my kids and being home from it. I think a lot of times when I was, like, missing the military, I was looking through rose-colored glasses of, like, "Oh, if I was in the military, it'd be so great because 'cause I'd be
Mhm.
doing this," but I wasn't thinking if I was in the military, I would be in Afghanistan or,
Mhm.
somewhere in the globe that's not home, or we would be
Mhm.
having to figure out how to manage childcare with both of us being in the military, or maybe we wouldn't even be stationed together. And so I always like kind of looked back with, oh, it'd be so nice, but not realizing like all the reasons why I got out of the military. And so I think eventually I realized that I did make the right choice because I got to be home for all those things. And especially when the pandemic hit, I think that probably, like, drilled it home the most because I had friends who were dual military and they had kids and, like, the struggles they had with figuring out childcare for those few months, and I know that the military worked with people, but it doesn't mean that it was easy to deal with.
No, it wasn't. And there was a lot of people who really even struggled because their kids were out of school and they could do telework, but then it's like your kids are home full time and you're trying to balance telework with having a kids running around and it can be very, very difficult. And some people didn't like telework because of that, because
Yeah.
they couldn't really balance it all. What led you to go, okay, I'm out of the military now. I'm going to start this blog and I'm going to start writing? Because I know you wrote a blog before you decided to do a podcast.
Yeah, so I was really struggling with, like, my new role of being a mom, and I felt like I was so alone and everything that I was feeling, and I think part of that had to do with I felt really alone being a woman who was a veteran, and then I also felt like I was the only one who was struggling in motherhood because it looked like everybody was so happy and, like,
I'm perfect.
everyone
Yeah.
everyone's children are sleeping through the night, and, like, I was just so alone, and so I was looking for something, and my mom sent me a blog by Lisa Jo Baker, and it was all about like how moms are superheroes, and it was really encouraging. But she did a thing where on Fridays everyone would virtually write for 5 minutes based off a prompt word that she picked, and so I started writing for 5 minutes once a week, and I started to find community with those women who were writing those 5 minute prompts, and I got involved in a group, and then I was like, well, I really enjoy this community and these friendships. And so that was what led me to start a blog.
That's so cool. And you know what? You just underscored something that I think a lot of people who are lonely don't do, which is take the initiative to build community. And I believe that we all have the ability to do that. It doesn't matter if you're single, you're married, you're working, you're in between jobs, you're unemployed, you're whatever. You can always find community in your city or in your town, especially these days with the internet. There's just no reason not to find a group or support from people who are experiencing the same things that you are, especially through all like the Facebook groups. That's just one example. How did you find the writing group?
It was through the 5 Minute Friday that I found different people who were in the group, and they did a 31-day challenge in October where you write every day for 31 days. And through that, I connected with some of the other women, and a lady started a Facebook group, and I joined that. And that was kind of how I got connected with other women like on a consistent basis. And we would like have a prompt every day and post our blog of the day. And then you would read the five above it. And then, so you would always
That's,
have people commenting and like,
yeah,
yeah.
that's so cool. And you were just getting like real time feedback about your writing and
Yeah.
about like what people thought. And no, that's great. And so that's what spurred you to start the blog.
Yep.
Wow. And then, so how long did you do the blog before you started the podcast?
20, a long time, like 4 years.
Oh my God, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow. Because it really was your podcast that I think blew up, not
Yeah, it
necessarily
was.
but you
It
did the
definitely
blog.
wasn't the blog. Someone once told me, like, the first year I was podcasting, they're like, "But you're, like, so popular and you haven't been doing this for long." And I was like, "No, I did it for a long time. No one knew who I was."
I love it. Yeah, well, I was a blogger, but not a consistent blogger like you were. I've been a blogger since 2014, but not. I mean, I probably do maybe at least 2 or 3 a year, but sometimes more, just depending on what I was doing. But wow, so you did the blog for a long time. And did you start? What made you say, okay, I'm doing all this writing, I'm blogging, now I'm going to start interviewing people? Like, how did you make that transition?
So I mentioned the 31-day series. So I did that twice. The first year I did it on, like, it was a 5-minute every day, write on a prompt word and focus on your theme. And I did military. So I did like what it was like to be in the military. And then the next year I did it on travel because we had moved to LA and there was lots of travel stuff. And then the third time I did it, I was like, I don't want to write for 31 days. I'll interview people about deployments and then it'll be so much easier. It was not so much easier. In a way it was easier because I could do a lot of it up front, but it was still a ton of work to, like, gather all the interviews. But that was how the interviews started, because I was really like, I don't want to write 31 blogs. That's a lot of work. So I'm going to interview people and then I'll tell their stories. And that was where the interviewing started.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, like, interviewing is tough, or podcasting is tough, but I think blogging is harder because you have to come up with content, you have to edit the content, you have to put the pictures with the content. And that's the thing, Amanda, you didn't just podcast either. You blogged your podcast.
Right.
You put a lot into this. And I think that's probably because you had so much experience podcasting before.
Yeah.
So when you started your podcast, were you nervous about putting that content out there?
No, because I had done so much stuff and no one paid attention. So I was like, I don't even know if, like, I was like, maybe if I'm really, really lucky, I'll get like 5,000 downloads on the podcast. And my, like, crazy goal that I thought was nowhere possible was 10,000 downloads, because I had tried so hard and, like, I had shared so much and done all these things, and, like, I felt like I was talking to no one. And so when I started the podcast, I was just like, this is another crazy idea. Let's see if it works. And obviously it worked.
Right. But what kept, okay, but you know what though? You really think teaching, I think, a lot of people a lot here, because what made you keep going, even though it wasn't doing, like what you said, like what you, like, quote unquote, well, like, what made you keep doing it and stick with it anyway?
Well, I did quit a few times, but I always just came back to writing. And especially, so when I started, I was like, I'm not doing anything military, which I think is funny now because, like, I'm so military focused. But I was like, I don't want to do military stuff. I'll be a mom blogger. I'll be a travel blogger. I'll talk about natural birth. I'll do this. I'll do that. And none of that really resonated. And then when I did the deployment series, it kind of brought me back to the military stuff and sharing my stories. And I said not very many people were listening, but there were a few people. And, like, one of my friends who I met through my blog, she found it while she was deployed, and she was trying to decide, should she stay in the military, should she get out? And she had a 1-year-old daughter, and she was deployed, and she was really struggling. And so she is my friend today, and her emails of, like, encouragement about how much the blog was helping her and her struggles, and, like, how a friendship was built out of that, that really kept me going. So there weren't a lot of people listening, but there were some people, and those people who commented and told me how much the work I was doing mattered to them made me keep sharing stories. And then once I started the podcast, I love hearing the stories of women, and so I just love doing it. And I just get so much back from telling the stories and hearing the stories that I can't stop.
Yeah. And it's not really about how big it gets or how many downloads you have. It's fun to watch that stuff, and it's good to know it's resonating, but it's not what's driving you to do it. And so I think that's what people can sense. They can sense when something is just, you're just so passionate about it and you love doing it, and you do it regardless of how big it got. I remember when your stuff got really, really big, and Chris Berryman, he's a friend of mine, and let me see, my mouse is having issues for the moment. Let me try. There we go. Let's see. He says, Amanda Huffman, I'm so humbled and honored to be here today with you and Teresa Carpenter. So thanks, Chris. I remember when you got really big and you had a moment. You got this like national coverage. I want to say you were on like CNN, or you were on some MSN.
I was on Fox News.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about how that happened. And I think, wasn't that kind of a turning point in your podcast?
Actually, I didn't really feel like I got much momentum from Fox News. I was like, I'm gonna be on Fox News. It's gonna be so awesome. Yeah, I was really shocked that like it didn't, like, on behind the scenes, I didn't really see like a big jump in like downloads or anything. It's been like a slow and steady growth over time. Yeah. And I can't even, usually when my blog does or my podcast does really good, I'm like, what's happening? Why?
Yeah.
It doesn't ever seem to like correlate to something that I'm doing. And so it's like an article will circulate that I wrote a year or two ago, and it'll be like going crazy. And I'm like, what? Yeah. But it was really fun to be on Fox News, and yeah.
You know what? You bring up another point that I think a lot of people don't understand about creating content. Like, there's all these experts out there who will tell you, like, oh my gosh, do this and you'll go viral. Do this and you're going to be big. I honestly am at the point in my work where I'm like, I don't know what's going to get big anymore. Like, things resonate with different people, and different messages are taken differently depending on someone's prism or their own personal experiences and how much that story matters to them personally. And so you just don't know. I mean, I think that as a creator, you put out things that resonate or that you think might help others, but you don't necessarily know where the stuff is going to lead or what's going to end up happening. Would you agree with that?
Oh, for sure. And like, just because something like doesn't resonate right now, like it doesn't mean that like 5 years from now someone's gonna find it. And like, that's the like crazy part, is like I'll publish something and I'll be like, this is good, this is great, and then like nothing happens, and then like a year later, like I'll get messages like, oh, I read this thing that you wrote, and I'm like, what are you talking about? I don't even remember writing it. But it's like you can't really predict what big, you think national media attention, that's like a really big deal. And I'm not saying it's not a big deal, but it also, it didn't really seem to be that big of a deal for the podcast as a whole. Maybe over time it did, and like maybe people share, it's more the people behind the scenes who talk about you and share what you're doing to other people. And I think that's, the word of mouth is like always the best way to get the word out about whatever you're doing.
I agree. And James Clark says, good to be here. And he says, he was adding to what you said. And he said, just be yourself, and that the right people will find you when you're yourself. And yeah. And then also Chris said too, 100%. And it's true. I mean, I think that when you do this work, you do it because you're called to it. Like, there's like a calling within your heart that says, I'm meant to do this. And, you know, I think I have something to say and a message to put out there, or through my guests, they have a message to say and something to put out there that has a point that can resonate with others. And then you just let it go. You put it out there and you let it go, and you just see what happens. And sometimes it might not, you think the things that will resonate don't. And then some of the things that you're like, that wasn't very much. I didn't really put a lot into that. And then that's the thing that like really blows up. And you're like, I maybe sat there in front of a camera for 10 seconds and said something, you know, and you just don't know. And so I think that's why it's just good to just like James said, just be yourself, do your stuff, and the right people will find you, and it will come together if you believe that you're on this purpose. And speaking of which, what do you think ultimately, now that you've been doing, because you've been doing this for like what, 10 years now, or like 5 to 10 years, I think.
Well, my son turns 9 this summer, so it's been about 8 years, over
Okay.
8 years. Yeah.
Yeah, I was watching you when you first started, and I was like, wow, she's like doing a podcast about military. Nobody does podcasts about women in the military. And I
But now
remember
they do.
now they do. And it's like, now I'm a podcaster. It's just so crazy. Like, I never would have imagined I'd be sitting here interviewing you. It just never would have even occurred to me that this would happen. And so, to kind of bring this full circle, what do you think, like, now, what you feel your purpose is and what you're doing?
I'm shifting more towards helping girls as they join the military. I mean, you mentioned my book, The Beginning, that's coming out. I've been working on that behind the scenes probably for 3 years, and so it's really exciting that, A, I can talk about it finally, and B, that it's publishing in the fall. The more that I dive into ways to help girls specifically join the military, the more I realize there aren't enough resources for girls to join the military. And I feel like I'm really passionate that the military can only change when there's more women serving in the military. We have like all these problems with women, like women retention, sexual assault,
Yeah, I
and
missed it.
just,
Yep.
yeah. And all those things are happening. And you have to have at least 30% of the culture to be on the same page before you can make a change in an organization. And women don't make up 30%. And luckily, we have male allies who are working to change it. But I think with more women serving, it can make it an even bigger impact. And I think a lot of people are trying to like solve the problem to keep women in, which I think if you have more women to start, then you don't have to
Right.
worry as much about. I mean, I think it makes it easier for women to stay in, and you don't have to like, every woman doesn't have to stay in to keep the numbers up because there's more women starting in the beginning. So if we could get to 40% women, 50% women would be amazing. And so
Yes.
that's where I'm trying to get that, like, it's normal to join the military. It's
Right.
normal for you to be a woman, and you can do anything you want today. And so I'm really passionate about that.
I love it. And I'll tell you, like, even at my rank, especially in the more operational lanes, because I do a lot of work with like the threes of the world, the operators, and in their fields, they're still predominantly men. And I think that is something that happens for a variety of reasons. There isn't just like one reason that you can pinpoint why that happens, but I believe that it benefits everybody, not just women. It benefits men to serve with more women, because you get different points of view. It's no different in my mind about why we need to have more ethnicities in the military, why we need to have more diversity of ideas, not just diversity of skin color or gender, but just people who can come to the table and look at a problem differently and come up with a different solution than sort of a groupthink mentality. And to be honest, we just you're right. There really aren't enough resources out there for people who want to join the military, especially as women, and especially if they're not from a town that has a lot of people who serve. Like, I'm from Columbus, Ohio, and there are not a lot of people from Columbus, Ohio who are joining the military. When I told people I was joining the military at 19, they thought I was crazy. They thought I was not cut out for the military. They thought I wouldn't last in the military. They didn't think that I was the kind of person who would join the military. And it just goes to show you that there are different kinds of people who can be in the military and stick around as long as I have. But unfortunately, there just aren't a lot of me's out there who can demonstrate that. And so the more diversity, the more people that we have, like a good example that comes to mind, who I'll have on my podcast as well, is Kelly Renee Hall. I mean, to have somebody like her showing, I don't know if you know who she is. She's been in a lot of pageants and other things, and she's got a very, very prominent Instagram profile, and she also has her own podcast. I think it's called Misrepresentation, and she's just amazing. And she's really showing the younger people that you can have a social media presence and be a podcaster and do the things that like I'm doing and then also be very feminine and be beautiful, and all those other things. And so I think that the more that we show that there's all different types of people who can join the military and succeed, the better organization we're going to have. Would you agree?
Yeah, for sure. And that I think there's also not enough focus on, like, you can do the military for 4 years and gain so much from it, and then you have the whole rest of your life to do something else. Like, as a person who only served 6 years, sometimes I get imposter syndrome that I didn't retire and now I have a podcast and a platform helping women veterans, but like I only made it to the rank of captain. And so I think that there needs to be like more talk about like bringing all veterans into the fold and not just like the retirees, because it is really hard to be running a, a, a podcast focused on military women and not being like a retired general that gets you into certain rooms that I can't get into. And it's something that I felt a challenge for. And so I think it's not just that we like talk about like getting women into, maybe that's why I'm so passionate, is because not just about getting women in higher ranks, but also just like the military changed my life for the better. And there's so many things that I gained from it. And I was in for 6 years. And I think you can gain so much from a 4 or 6 year tour of the military. And I think it'll help the world as a whole to have more women serving in the military and more leaders that go into businesses and change the world. And so it's like a waterfall effect. I get too excited about it.
No, I love it. I agree. I mean, I'm sold, of course, but no, I agree. I agree. Like, I don't understand, like, my friends who are struggling, especially my friends who struggle financially. I just think to myself, like, oh, why didn't you just join the military? You could have saved so much money. You could have had 30 days off a year to go on vacations. You could have, like, I'm here in Germany. I've got my weekends off. I'm able to do things at night. Well, not really, because I get too tired, but I'm able to do things. And, and it's like, gosh, and if I try to talk to people who aren't familiar with military service, they just don't understand. They have this like one way of seeing the Navy or the branches, and they see it as just this, oh my gosh, I'm in war, I'm in combat. This is what it's going to be like, and I'm going to die. I mean, they don't see like every side of the picture. And yes, there is that risk. And sometimes
Right.
that might be what you are called to do, but you're going to be called to do a lot of other things too. And you're going to get skills, like you said, in business. You're going to get education. You're going to get leadership. You're going to get mentors, people who really will bring you along and bring you up. And it's just such an amazing opportunity that I do not think enough young people tap into. So I love what you're doing, Amanda. I think it's great. And I applaud it. What are some of your other projects that you're working on at the moment?
I'm also trying to create a women mentorship program because I feel that as a woman veteran, when I left the military, I felt like an outsider. So I didn't really get involved in the veteran community, but then I slowly got pulled back in, and I found the veteran community is such an amazing place to be, because there's so many amazing people, and then you have this camaraderie between different people just through your service. And so I want to bring more women veterans back to the veteran community through mentorship, and it ties in with the book because it's helping mentor women who are joining the military, who are in the military, who are about to transition, and where we can all build a community around each other to support each other with the knowledge that we've gained being a little bit farther in the journey.
I love it. I love it. I mean, that's really what it's about. It's about building friendships, building community, and other things. So we have a question. We have a couple comments from Chris and some good stuff that you may want to look at later. But I do want to bring in the question that we have here, if I can get my stupid mouse to work, and it's not working. So I am just going to read it because I can't seem to show it, but that is okay. Let me see here. So he says, I work with many races, but only one female. She feels inferior. She's one of my best workers. How do I confront it without feeling like I'm giving her special attention?
Oh, that's such a good question, because I can see how like it's kind of like hard to find the balance. I would try to like not think of her as a female, which I know is like the worst thing to say. But when I was in Afghanistan, women who are soldiers were considered like a third sex, and so it was kind of like we weren't really seen as women like Afghan women were, but we were kind of like, but we were on par with our male counterparts, even though we were women in Afghanistan. So if you can like try and think of her just as your troop and not as a woman in the service, and then try and figure out how you can help her. And like obviously she's a woman, so it's not like as cut and dry, but I would say just try and focus on like, what would I do if my male troop was in the same situation? How would I encourage him? How would I help him? And then try and apply that to her. And if she needs help like from other women, tell her about the mentorship program that I'm working on, because she might just need another female to talk to, and if she doesn't have that, you won't be able to provide that no matter what.
That's awesome. And the only thing that I would add to that is try to compliment her on the things that she's doing well. I think that's the best way to build people's confidence, is because sometimes people don't see what they're good at and what their superpower is. And sometimes if as a leader, you can capitalize on the things that they're good at. You can notice that certain people have a proclivity towards certain things, or they like to work on certain things. Encourage that, because that helps to build people's confidence, because they're like, oh shoot, I really am good at this. And then that helps them feel less inferior. So that would be my advice. Is there anything else that you want to put out, or anything that you'd like to add that I haven't asked you?
I don't think so. I feel like we covered everything that I expected that we would talk about or wanted to talk about.
Okay. Well, where can people find you?
So my favorite place to be is LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn. It's my favorite place to be, Amanda Huffman. And then my podcast is Women of the Military, which you can find on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. And then you can also find me at Airman to Mom on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
Awesome. And I will link to all of your stuff in the description. I'll add that on YouTube. And just to tag on to what Blair said, he said, I don't treat her any different. It's the other workers that downgrade her. And that is a good thing to add here, is if it's other people who are downgrading her, that's where you don't have to be a bystander. And sometimes it has to be very uncomfortable. But one of the things, who's that guy? The Athena guy, Brad, gosh, I can't remember his name, but he wrote a whole book about this. Athena Rising, I think is what it's called. And it's basically about how as a male not to be just be a bystander. Don't just sit there and like when everybody's downgrading somebody, allow it to happen. Be the person that speaks up and says, no, man, that's not cool. No, don't talk to her like that. Why are you being like that? Because sometimes I think it's hard when somebody's being bullied or somebody's being belittled for them to speak up for themselves in an open group. But if the bystander can do it and say, why are you talking to her like that? That's rude. Just being able to do that sometimes it shuts the person down. It really does. And it's very hard to do that. And most people won't, but it's maybe one method to try to do that. But absolutely. It was such a pleasure having you on the show, Amanda. I will meet you backstage. I'm just going to go here on solo layout real quick to say goodbye to everyone. But thank you so much for being on the show. And everyone, thank you for joining us for another episode of Stories of Service podcast. I will be trying to do this every week. My schedule is going to change a little bit come this Saturday, but hopefully I will be back in about a week to do another live broadcast. So enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Thank you for joining us. And if you're joining us later, thanks for watching or thanks for listening. Take care now. Talk to y'all later. Bye now.